Howdy BHRCers. You can find every episode of Why People on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcast content. On this Why People episode number 19, we have James Slaughter, who is the CHRO at Flexcon. James's background is really cool. He's done some really neat things, and his spot now is super exciting. Looking forward to the conversation. Stay tuned. All right, welcome to Why People Podcast, episode number 19. For those folks listening for the first time and unfamiliar, Why People is a Boston HR Council production. The BHRC is one of the largest HR executive communities in the world with just over 1,200 HR executive council members. Thrilled to be joined by BHRC co-founder and Why People co-host Paul Roberts. Paul?
Thank you, Sean. Good day to all our listeners. Super jazzed up for today's guest.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And super excited to introduce our guest today. James Slaughter is a longtime BHRC member, but pretty new as of this podcast to his CHRO role at Flexcon. James, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and very appreciative of what, Paul, Sean, both of you do and the whole BHRC community. So thanks for having me.
James, we're excited. We'll jump right into it. As of this recording, you're a few months into a new CHRO role, so super excited to hear about that. But true to form, true to Why People form, would love to kind of get a little background on James Slaughter. So tell us a little bit about your early days, and then we can kind of get into what got you into the HR.
Yeah, good to start there. So and maybe I can also talk a little bit about Flexcon because maybe folks haven't heard of Flexcon. So I'm relatively new, or actually quite new. I'm almost at 2 months, I believe, now with Flexcon. So I'm definitely still learning, drinking from a fire hose, first 90 days, all of those different things. So, but we are a global manufacturing company that we focus on material sciences. We're located in Spencer, Massachusetts, which is just west of Worcester. So we're a little bit further out there. We've got multiple sites across the world, really. Heavily here in North America, of course, is, we're headquartered in Spencer, but we've got sites across the U.S. We also have facilities, manufacturing facilities in Europe, and also a site in Asia as well. So we're about 70 years old at this point, the company. And a really interesting feature of Flexcon is, even after all these years, we're still a private company and we're family owned. So the original founder, Miles McDonough, has passed down the company from generation to generation. We're now on the second generation leadership. And so that's a really important component of our culture with a lot of really great benefits. So that's a little bit about Flexcon. I'm totally jazzed to be here. It's a great company with a great culture and a great leadership team. But I'll get to what you'd ask, which is a little bit about me. And I'm glad to kind of just take everyone through, a brief overview of my background. But, kind of starting with what are the common threads or the things that have really made a big difference for me throughout my both childhood, my college, educational years, and certainly my professional careers, both in human resources and in elsewhere. And those three things are, I've just been so fortunate to have the opportunity to work with so many strong mentors. So you'll kind of hear that as a common theme throughout my career, particularly. I've had a great support network. And when I say support network, it's really kind of my family, friends, that I've had along the way, and then colleagues as well, people that I've had the opportunity to work with that have kind of carried through my entire career, or that I've seen in episodes, at the various different companies that I've been a part of. And then the third one, quite frankly, is luck, right? I mean, I think, we're all hopefully the beneficiary of sort of, the good luck and things happening in our life where we're well positioned to, take advantage of lucky opportunities that truly just fate kind of led us there. And I've had more than my share of those. So I'm very appreciative of all those that have happened throughout my life. So with that as a backdrop, so I grew up in a really small town in Southwest Missouri. So any Southwest Missouri folks, shout out. Although I doubt there are a whole lot of them on this podcast, but in the event there are.
Got a caller from Southwest Missouri, James. We haven't opened the live phone lines yet, but somebody try calling in.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it's probably my mom. So speaking of my mom, so that's kind of the first major, kind of influence in my life was my mom. I grew up, single mother, hardest worker I've ever met in my life. One of the things that she sort of instilled in me and my sister is, the ability to kind of influence your surroundings or your situation. We didn't have a ton of money growing up. And, but what happened was my mom, similar to, what I was talking about with luck, there were a couple of things that happened. She was able to seize on a couple of opportunities and improve our situation. And, it was a very modest situation, but, I'm fortunate to have been able to learn from her that, hard work, dedication, commitment, and sort of the eye on, toward to the future, it's always going to pay off, right? It may not be immediate, but it's always going to pay off. And that's really, kind of the definition of my mom is really hardworking, and seizing opportunities to improve your situation, which I appreciate and pull on all the time. So I was a first generation college student, proud of that. I went to the University of Florida. I'm also proud of that. So I'm a big Gator. So any college football fans out there, call me up because I always love to talk about college football, particularly SEC, and the Gators. Still had my best job probably in my life in college. I ran a little coffee shop in a parking lot in front of a Publix and in Gainesville, Florida. And it was great. I learned about customer service. I learned about getting up early on, Saturday mornings after, or worse yet, Sunday mornings after, a UF game, home game in the evening. So it wasn't always easy, but I found my way out of bed and into the coffee shop, and I enjoyed every second of it. And I did that until, it was time for me to kind of get a, sort of more of a real job that's going to, hopefully influence my future. So I actually joined Walmart, kind of did the typical management training program, did a couple of summer internships, one of which was in Bentonville, Arkansas. And we'll get into that in a moment. But, I was working while I was in college in a big corporation. So I really got to cut my teeth on, leadership and customer service and commitment and hard work and all those things. So that was hugely influential to, early in my career. That's also where I met my wife, was in college. So that's kind of the second major influence in my life. And I got to be honest with you, things weren't going particularly well for me from an academic standpoint before I met her. And she taught me to take things seriously, right? And to kind of believe in myself, think about the future, apply myself, actually try. And I did all those things. And if not for her, maybe I was one bad decision away from, shaking a can on a corner. I don't know if it was that bad, but she definitely, kind of helped me get my act together, get in shape and really start to plan out the future. We're still obviously together and married today. We've got 3 wonderful children. We've really made a great life together. So so much of my life I thank her for. So continuing on the Walmart story. So I, did store management, of course. Yeah, upon graduation, actually, I was a assistant manager at a Walmart store. Did a lot of different kind of store leadership roles over the few years that I was there. But one of the more probably interesting and relevant experiences that I had there was they asked me to come to Bentonville for a summer and do an internship in the people division, which was the HR function at Walmart. And that's where everything changed. So first of all, that's where I met my first mentor, my first professional mentor. He was my boss in Arkansas, a guy named Kirk Williams. I owe so much to him. He literally called me Grasshopper. That's how much of a mentor-mentee relationship we had. And, and he taught me a lot of things. And, I was just a kind of raw, young, silly, and probably lacked good judgment college student. And he really helped me mature, understand what the real world was going to look like. And if not for him, the trajectory would have been very different, no doubt. And Walmart was going through a really big HR transformation at the time, kind of moving from the whole personnel manager, form of HR to more of a strategic HR business partner model. They were actually bringing in a lot of new HR talent at the time. I didn't know what all that meant, but, looking back, I can understand what was happening in the company. And because of that, I knew that that's something that I wanted to pursue, at some point in my career. It was a great experience. So I actually made the difficult choice to go back to school upon, graduating undergrad, went to business school. And the reason I did that was because I was looking at who they were hiring at Walmart, and they were professionalizing the function. So they were hiring a lot of folks with, MBAs or masters in HR. And so I thought my best path would probably be to, while I was still young and, kind of living in a college town, to go back and do that. So I did just that. And that's really kind of the early years. And then, from there, my actual HR career really started.
I mean, what a cool story, James. We'll ask a few questions based on what you shared. So number one, geez, what a What a great time to be at UF. I'll put Paul on the spot here. The first time I ever met Paul was, gone back, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. We were both at a firm, and he had the big, fancy corner office, but he had a big, fat head, whatever those things are called, blow-up size Tim Tebow face facing out his window, like towards the parking lot. So I know Paul is the biggest Tim Tebow fan out there. And James, I think your undergrad was probably a tick before him, but maybe you were doing your graduate stuff right in Tebow mania. So
That's right.
So a good spot to start, right, Paul?
Oh, couldn't agree more. Big Tim Tebow fan. Oh man, future politician, I think.
We'll see what happens. See what happens. I didn't know that about you, Paul.
Yeah.
I did this for many years. I'm a
For those podcast audio viewers, Paul is doing the Tebow their fist to forehead. James, it's neat to hear kind of your background and really neat to hear about how your family kind of shaped, from a foundational standpoint, your approach to work and in life. It's we love hearing things like that because everyone's story is so uniquely different, but always seems to be the same in the sense that it kind of points them or drives them in a certain way. But a neat thing that you shared, and something that I think was going to come up a little bit later, but we'll kind of dive in now. Paul and I have been really lucky to chat with some pretty amazing people in this HR people executive world, and it's gone just beyond New England now. It's gone really all over the country and globe. And your name has come up a lot from other folks, like and again, I call it like a coaching web, because I relate most things to sports, unfortunately. But there's some pretty amazing leaders all over the place now that always say, hey, my friend James is a part of your BHRC group. Tell him I said hi. New Jersey, out in the Midwest. Like, we chat with people all over the place that you've worked with, in your career, and you've kind of talked about, luck and the fortune to be able to work with some of these people. So not going to fast forward on you, but tell us a little bit about just some of, and you don't have to name them, but just some of these amazing people that always say, hey, my friend James, which is pretty cool,
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's something I actually do want to get into, because it's kind of like the Oscars, right? Like you don't necessarily want to name names, but because you may miss someone, but there actually are people. I mentioned Kurt from Walmart, and he's gone on to have an amazing career, since then, and he and I are still in touch. But one of the things that we'll talk about probably a little bit toward the end of this talk is that, I think that's kind of the highest calling, mentorship, right? And giving back and being a giver. And when I think about my career, I don't know all of these wonderful people that were so generous with their time. They were so selfless, and they dropped their egos or whatever, and lacked any self-interest and invested in me. So to me, there's not much more a person can do for another human being than to do those things. And I hope, maybe I'm at that point in my career where I can really focus on that. And I hope that that's something that I can focus, because wouldn't it be great if one of these days, you're interviewing someone down the road and they say, wow, James had a big influence on me and he helped me. To me, that would be kind of the ultimate success. And the other thing about it is, I'm not so sure, you'd have to ask these people, but I'm not so sure that along the way, whenever I'm working with these individuals that had such a profound influence on my career, my personality, me as a person, that they intended to do it in the moment, right? I think it just more kind of came naturally, and it just happened. And now with the benefit of hindsight, we look back and say, wow, what a special relationship, or a number of relationships we had. But I think that there's something different about those types of people that you just described, and that have definitely influenced me. And I do want to get into actually some of them in a few moments, because they were just that impactful. But I think there's something different about those types of people. And I can just hope and try to, and we all, I think probably hope and try to emulate that as much as we possibly can, and go out of our way to be of service to others. Because to me, that's just the ultimate calling. That's the legacy. In my opinion, that's the legacy.
I'll stop you here and bounce back in, James, before we kind of get into kind of career pathing relative to introduced to HR and people. Now let's talk about that journey. I'll ping pong it back to you because I have my own feelings about this and mentorship, right? And you said something really profound there, right? Like this idea that somebody that is doing a whole bunch of great things and charged with a whole bunch of responsibility takes an interest in someone, really, in almost some way, shape, or form, ends up being a one-way street. You're not able to reciprocate at that point. When I think about that in my own life, I think about the idea of sending the elevator down, or a lot of these cliches. But at that point, like anyone, doesn't matter where you are or what you do. Like someone went out on a limb to give you some type of help or advice. And it always seems to be like this kind of pay it forward thing, while also thinking about like, hey, I remember when I was treading water or figuring out if I was to do HR or use a can on the side of the street, right? To use your analogy. And so it always seems to make sense on why people do it. You just don't really realize in the time. So like, how do you think about it now relative to mentorship?
Well, I try to keep it in mind. I mean, I don't know if it's something that you can do just by thinking about it. It's kind of like when you exercise and you're lifting weights and you're thinking about a particular muscle, and maybe you work that muscle a little harder because you're thinking about it. I try to do that. I don't know how successful I am, candidly, right now. It's something I think on my journey that is extremely important, of paramount importance to me. I mean, I that's what I want, because I know that's what brings me joy, and I know that's what influenced me and got me to the point where I am today. So, I'm probably not the best person to ask, because frankly, I think that I could do a better job. We probably all could do a better job. I want to do a better job. But in the meantime, it's showing up every day for people. It's being there. It's not rushing through conversations. I think that was one of the big things that, if I think back, the common threads on all the people that have helped me, they have spent time with me and listened and not judged, and reserved all of the judgment and ego and the desire to pass on all these, these insights. It's not really about that. It's about listening and coaching and being there particularly during more difficult times. Holding people accountable, I think, is another piece. That's another thing. I mean, there are times where, everyone who's on my list, it's a good list, but everyone who's on my list, there are probably times where I was pretty angry at them because they were giving me some tough feedback as well. But that's what made them great, is because they gave me the positive reinforcement when it mattered, and they gave me the tough feedback when it mattered as well. And those are just as meaningful. So if I reflect, those are all the things that I received as gifts from all of these individuals. And those are the things that, I try to think about in my day to day, to incorporate those into my relationships that I have with people.
Yeah. Well, that's great, James. And thanks for letting me, throw the brake on for a second and lean in there, because I do think it's super important. And it's something really that everyone on the podcast has talked about in a different way. You're not the only one saying, I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm thinking about it.
Exactly.
Right. So we have this great background, right? We understand kind of, you in the formative years, if you will, through education. You get this opportunity with Walmart to get involved with the people practice. Before we get on that path, can you tell us a little bit about like that inflection point on what you knew about HR and the people function, like where that fit kind of in your kind of thought process?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I did a, undergrad in business. I'm kind of I consider myself sort of a business person first. I always have been. So I tended to, at that point, and still today, kind of tend to think of things in terms of like a P&L and, the business. And I think what I realized, particularly whenever I was given the opportunity to do the internship, is if you think about a business, no doubt, no question, it's industry agnostic, it's geography agnostic. The biggest lever any company ever will have to pull is their people. The company typically resides with the people, and decisions that are made, even if they don't feel like they are directly connected to people, they are almost always. And so I think learning that, I was able to work, I wouldn't have to get into all the details, but I was able to work on a couple of really high leverage projects at Walmart, where decisions were being made that had profound impact on thousands of employees. We call them associates across across the company, and those were decisions that HR didn't make, right? They wouldn't make. The business made the decisions and then partnered with HR to be able to strategize on the outcomes and then work the organization through the changes from a change management standpoint. That's the most important part of all of it, right? I mean, you can have the greatest brilliant minds sitting in a room making company decisions on strategy in the world, but where it falls flat is on the execution, and that's where the people are involved. That's where emotions and personalities and resistance to change and all that stuff happens. And so, if you don't get that right, none of the other stuff really matters. So I think that's really was the hook for me, is that I saw that, I was able to see it in real time, and I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I had no idea how to be a part of it, from a career standpoint, or really what it meant from a functional, HR functional standpoint. But I knew that I wanted to be a part of that, because to me that mattered the most in any business setting.
Cool to hear you conceptualize that, because a lot of folks that we've chatted, a lot of your peers that are on the podcast, that's an interesting, call it bridge, right? From college or education to the actual workforce, what HR and people, number one, meant to them at the time in their own head, but what it meant wherever they kind of got started. And I don't want to, nothing to spoiler alert here, but like when I look at your resume, your career, your path, I mean, you've been at some pretty amazing organizations, right? Like, again, my dumb sports analogy, like you played for the Yankees, you played for the Sox, the
Sox,
the Pats. You played for the big teams. And gonna kind of turn it back over to you to kind of talk about that path and some decisions you made. But the thing that sticks out to me before, doing kind of the prep for this conversation, James, is, and I don't know if it's luck, strategy, maybe a little of both. You seem to have been at places that if you were to ask the layperson, that organization seems to have made a pretty serious investment in the people or in the people HR strategy, versus some organizations that hadn't, and especially when you think about the early and mid 2000s, right? So would love to turn it back over to you to tell us a little bit about that journey from starting into kind of climbing the ranks, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll kind of move to the next phase, which is, another intersection of luck, to be honest. So I was graduating from business school and looking for a job, knew that I wanted to do something in HR. My wife is from Central Florida, and so we wanted to go back to Central Florida because it made sense from a career standpoint for her, and it was familiar to us. So I was kind of limited in the options, actually, that I had from a career standpoint. However, luckiest break ever from a career standpoint, Pepsi Bottling Group just happened to have a HR rep position open in Central Florida, in Orlando, in the manufacturing plant. And that's where it all started, really. I mean, and that's where I kind of started the whole mentorship journey, and PepsiCo has a very rich, to your point, Sean, a very rich heritage and culture of investing in people and putting people first. Such a people heavy organization. You have to, right? You got to take care of your teams. And they really put their money where their mouth is. So there's actually, in my opinion, there's no better place to learn about world-class human capital management than at PepsiCo. They've dialed it in. I was able to work with some of the greatest HR minds, I think, on the planet. And I'm not just being exaggerating. Even back to whenever I was in Central Florida in a plant, one of my first bosses, Darlene Paulin, she, great HR executive. She really, she taught me about being connected to the business. And that's another kind of common theme is, let's not do HR for the sake of HR, right? Let's connect HR to the business, and we need to be an enabler. And Darlene was absolutely that person. Dave Merriman, another one, kind of down in the Southeast as well. And so I think getting that education around really partnering with the business, it was me and, maybe one or two other people in the entire kind of Florida region as HR professionals. And then it was the business. So we had no choice, right? They had no choice but to partner with us on everything, because it wasn't this massive team. It was just us. And so we were known and I think well accepted and utilized and respected as true partners of the business, not HR people. Nothing against HR people, but you see the distinction. So that was a tremendous experience. That's where I really, really cut my teeth. And it wasn't easy, right? Making that adjustment where I wasn't, I didn't have a dedicated, focused HR background, so or even education. So I wasn't pulling on theory. It was really learning from the business, learning from my mentors, and and kind of hopefully developing my own style and all of that. I had the opportunity a couple years into my time with PepsiCo to move up to New Jersey, which was another really tremendous experience. A, it got me closer to the sun, right? Closer to headquarters in New York at PepsiCo. And B, it was in a labor union environment. So I was able to really, you talk about, learning, right? Really great learning opportunity. 1 + 1 never equals 2 in those environments. There's absolutely, positively an art to it. You learn about compromise. You learn about relationships. Real relationships. Can't fake it, right? I mean, it has to be real. And it wasn't perfect. There were times that I screwed up because, I would apply the logic rule and say, well, if I do this, then this is what's going to happen, right? And then that didn't happen. And I'd be like, oh, what happened there? And it's because, well, this is a different environment, right? You have to operate a little bit differently in these. And so, that's where I really kind of learned this, even though I didn't call it this at the time, but there's a cool book called The Obstacle is the Way. And it's really about, kind of like the path becomes the destination, essentially, right? And my big takeaway from that is, no one is good at everything that they do. In fact, most of us are probably good at just a few things that we do. But that doesn't mean we don't do the things that we're not great at. That just means that you have to reframe it and you have to think about it differently in terms of, I'm going to maximize my impact here. I'm going to bring some perspective to this. And I'm not going to get it perfect, but guess what? I'm going to learn and I'm going to develop. And so I look back on experiences throughout my career, and maybe the Jersey experience is not a good example, but I have plenty of them. And I think, wow, in the moment, that was tough, right? It was difficult. We're working hard, a lot of hours, stressful, and all those things. But the benefit of hindsight, looking back, I got more out of those experiences than the ones that I knocked the cover off the ball, right? And I'm appreciative of that. So it's been a couple of years in Jersey. Met another one of my great mentors, Renee Daniels. But she's again, gone on similar to Darlene and experienced great success in her career as well. And she was a big part of my growth in that environment. It was a perfect match. Then I got another lucky break where I was invited to come and work for the head of our North America HR organization, a lady named Paulette Albidi. And Paulette was hugely influential to me, both Paulette and then an individual named Paul Marchand, who, similar to Paulette, has gone on to be, CHRO, large global corporations, post their time at PepsiCo. And that's really, learning from the two of them about the craft, right? Like what is a strategic HR business partner at a very high level? And, how do businesses really leverage us as for expertise, trust, coaching, and all those things? And I couldn't have learned from anyone better. So I did a number of roles at PepsiCo in the headquarters office, working for Paulette, working for Paul. Working for an individual named Janine Wilkowski. Also, she's an OD expert and also a tremendous business partner. And with all of those experiences, I do want to kind of highlight one particular story that was a difference maker for me, for sure. So I was asked by the company to lead a HR transformation effort at PepsiCo. And the phase of the transformation that I was leading was a technology play. So we were actually implementing SAP for a human capital management system across our North American businesses, US and Canada. And I worked on the project for over a year. It was about 14, 15 months. And you talk about, in the throes of it, right? I mean, and I had no business being in a job like that, zero. But the company trusted me and they wanted to invest in me, and there were good mentors and a good infrastructure around it. So I, you talk about the obstacle as the way, and there were plenty of obstacles. And at the time, I probably wanted out of there pretty quickly, and I couldn't wait for it to end. But now looking back, that was one of the most important points in my career. Irrespective of all of the great skills from a project management, stakeholder engagement, stakeholder alignment, things like that I learned, it's really just kind of the grit, putting one foot in front of the other and overcoming challenges and working through, problems and developing solutions and all those in a team environment, right? I mean, there was no singular effort involved in that. So that was a great experience for me at PepsiCo. I was able to work with a guy, Taylor Blake, who was another, mentor of mine, who's gone on to have a tremendous career as well. Sharon Christian, who also I didn't work directly for Sharon. I worked alongside Sharon, and he taught me so much about, really kind of maturing as an HR executive. So again, a lot of mentors, a lot of really great experiences, not all rosy, but, looking back on them, they were the ones that mattered to me.
James, let me just lean in for 1 second. I mean, it's amazing, that list of people you just named, and it's interesting in the sense that, and a lot of our audience knows this. So I'm a career finance person. I don't pretend to be an HR expert. Anything I've ever learned HR wise from you and your peers, benefits I've learned from Paul. So I'm kind of a born again HR person, I guess, if you will. Like, so learning a lot of this like later in life. But it's interesting that Pepsi group, you can almost think of that HR, era, the same way that a lot of folks think of like GE and their like CEOs that have spun out of GE. Like, you look at that list and where people have landed. Again, I don't know all the names personally, but a lot of them I know, and their success is well documented. A question I had for you, and excited to kind of hear about how this now accelerates into a path to leadership and executive leadership. You've mentioned, and this is a common thread of all your peers, you've mentioned a lot of different areas within the HR function that you end up kind of pinging and ponging, if you will, right? Picking up where somebody needs you, and just kind of off the the top of my head, based on what you've shared, HRIS, org development, L&D, that does one of them end up becoming a common thread, or something that you did enough that you said, hey, this is kind of my thing? And does that accelerate you, or do you continue to kind of play hopscotch and say, hey, I'm the person that is willing to dive in when no one else will? Tell us a little bit kind of how that moves you into the future.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. And it's a conversation I actually had with a member of my team here at Flexcon just the other day. I look back on all of these experiences, and I do think that there was some method to the madness, right? Like, I did try to get different experiences. And some of them, you just, frankly, you grit your teeth a little bit, right? Because it's not like in my nature to do an SAP implementation. It's just not, I'm not wired necessarily that way. So I grit my teeth, but I did it, and I got a lot of experience from it. Where I gravitate toward are the ones where I get a lot of energy, and yeah, part of that's experimentation. I was able to lead talent development for our North American business at Pepsi, and that I absolutely loved, because then you're dealing with high potential talent, you're dealing with assessment, you're helping people, right? You're serving others, you're actually identifying talent within the organization that you can equip with tools to be able to grow and achieve what they want to achieve from a career standpoint. So to me, that was very meaningful. I don't know that I necessarily at any point in my HR career have really kind of picked a major, but what I would say is I have definitely enjoyed different aspects of HR more than others, and where I really kind of get a lot of energy and fulfillment is things dealing with talent, right? And helping assess talent, give people tools, help them in their career aspirations. And yeah, so that's absolutely driven me and accelerated, kind of the next phase of my career, because, whether you're doing HR business partner work or you're, leading a functional area within HR business partner, I think having kind of a broad visibility, broad visibility and broad thinking certainly from a business standpoint, but even from an HR standpoint, makes every functional leader within HR that much better. I mean, some of the greatest, for example, talent acquisition leaders that I've worked with in the past, they're experts in their particular domain, but they don't think only like a talent acquisition leader, right? They're thinking more holistically. And so that's something that I've had the opportunity to benefit of, having a lot of great experiences that I can do that. But I think, you do have to kind of put yourself out there, frankly. I mean, I never said no to any opportunity, even ones that I was like, not really sure that I would be successful in, but, give it a shot and, kind of leave it all on the field. But, not saying no to something gave me an opportunity to do a lot of different experience. I think that's important. It was definitely important to me. And I would encourage anyone in their career, whether, it's HR or something else, to get a lot of variety of experiences.
I think that's great advice, James. And really, almost across the board, all your peers say a lot of the same things. You almost have to challenge yourself sometimes to do something that isn't, on your Mount Rushmore of, the skill set or passion set. If ultimately, that true, leadership or, CHRO, Chief People Officer path is what you're interested in, you have to at least give yourself the time to understand it at a level of what it needs from a resource and time and thoughtfulness.
I agree. I mean, there's one other thing I'll say on that. I think that there's value in breadth for sure. We just talked about that. I do think that there's value also in depth at times, right? Like you take the SAP implementation at Pepsi that we just talked about. I wouldn't have gotten the same experience that I got out of that if I had been sort of light touch over the course of a year. The fact that I was given the opportunity to focus was a gift. And looking back, because I was so deep in it and I understood it so well, that's where I really got the learning. So, I that's another thing that I would really kind of encourage everyone to think about, particularly folks that are a little bit earlier in their career, is how can I have breadth, but then pick a few areas where you can really go deep and, completely immerse yourself in that environment for a year or whatever it is, because that's when the tough learnings and the real learnings can really happen.
Exactly, James. So just kind of be mindful of our time here in the episode. So don't want to rush it through, but would love to kind of chat from where we are in your story to the top of the house, if you will, to use another obnoxious cliche on my side. But tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll spend the last couple of minutes talking about the future and kind of how you think about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, from Pepsi, it was all about different types of experiences. I really did want to broaden. Actually, I made a decision that I wanted to get experiences in different industries. I think that's actually really helpful in HR. So I did kind of put myself out there. You guys know my background. The listeners don't, but I was with Biogen for a number of years, which is a tremendous experience with great mentors, great leaders. Tried some smaller organizations. I was with a company called Zealand Pharma for just over a year. And again, it was very different. It was a Danish company that was moving part of their operations to the U.S. So that was a really fascinating and broadening experience for me. Got my first, kind of true CHRO role at a company called Repligen. It's a life science tools company. That was my first kind of really sitting on, an executive leadership team in the C-suite, with a real kind of true public company board of directors and all that stuff, which was a tremendous experience for me. And I really appreciate the investment that the company made in me and the opportunity that I was given there. And then I actually tried something very different. I kind of tried to do the consulting thing for about a year. And, again, I look back on that and, I did it for about a year. Probably wasn't as successful as I had hoped for it to be, just from an economic standpoint, particularly. But with that being said, what a great learning, really, it's kind of like very entrepreneurial. It's really all about relationships. And it was a tremendous, year that I spent doing that. So, a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues, a lot of mentors along the way, but, those are all the things, right? And it wasn't always perfect, right? There were times where, the younger version of me would have said, well, that didn't go so well for whatever that was, right? That project or whatever over the years. But, now with the benefit of, some years and some gray hairs, I can kind of look back on all those experiences and say, yeah, they actually went exactly the way they should have gone, right? The obstacle is the way, right? And that's kind of the point.
And James, I appreciate you sharing that, right? The willingness to try something new, the willingness, fail might be a big word, but learn what you love, learn maybe what you don't love. Could you share it? And I don't know if there's a finite answer here, but at what point during this journey did you say, you know what, maybe leading the function is something I am truly interested in? Was there a certain time that it could go forward? Tell us a little bit about that.
It was Biogen. It was definitely Biogen. I was with much, much larger companies prior to that. Biogen is still a very large company, a great organization. And, I was working with tremendous mentors, Ginger, Gregory, Ken DiPietro, Kurt Landon, Gerald Novak, you name it, a lot of really, really, really great HR executives. And I think that's when I finally started to have the confidence to say, hey, maybe I can do this, actually. Maybe I can, be in a role like that at some point in my career. So then it was about, how do I get there? And, what's the best path? And again, it's not linear. I mean, I've done different things that, probably look more like, laterals and things like that, which is fine because it's all about getting the right set of experiences. But I think it was at Biogen where I, definitively kind of, in my mind at least, said, I think I can do that role at some point in my career.
That's a cool inflection point. and always love to hear the aha moment in folks' kind of journey. So last few minutes here, James, tell us a little bit about how you think about the role, the function moving into the future. We always kind of, do it in two ways. Like you yourself, how are you thinking about it? What are you preparing for? And we always say, hey, what advice would you give to someone that's 2006 James Slaughter, wondering, hey, what's it going to look like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, fortunately for all of us from a job standpoint, but unfortunately, there's no playbook, particularly now, right? I mean, society is in a really interesting place right now. You get political and economic turbulence. You got the rise of artificial intelligence as everybody kind of freaked out, remote work, back to office, hybrid, quiet quitting. Right. Everyone is kind of tired and confused. I think the role of HR is going to be very different going forward, because I think our goal and our calling is we have to help organizations, leaders, individuals relearn how to be engaged, which sounds so basic and so kind of crazy, but we've forgotten how to do that actually as a society. So to me, it's going to be around how can we help organizations build meaningful relationships in the workplace, discarding all the bad things that came along with, the good old days, right? Like it wasn't perfect. Discard all that. But in the new reality, how do we maintain the fact that, you go to work and you work with other human beings and we want to enjoy ourselves and be fulfilled, right? So how can we help people relearn how to do that? Collaborating on around common goals to help advance the organization forward. And it does sound simple. And in a way, it kind of is sort of back to basics, but isn't that kind of how it's always been, isn't it? Where it really is, at the end of the day, it's human beings rallying around a common goal to advance something bigger than themselves. And all of the realities around that in society and everything else are going to change. And that's why we always have to be thinking about, thinking about that. So that's kind of, I think, what's next for the function. That's certainly what's next for me at FlexCon, right? Is helping this organization do that better and do that more. You remember back, I don't know, what was it, like mid 2000s, early 2000s? It was the VUCA was the big term. It's still VUCA, right? Everything is still VUCA. So I think we every once in a while, you got to sort of go back to basics and reground each other. And that's what's next for me.
Awesome, James. And one last soundbite here. We're not forcing you to come up with a great saying or a meme or something that's going to go viral, but some advice for that person that is like listening to this podcast saying that James Slaughter guy is really cool. I think HR might be, for me, an early entrant into the HR and people workforce. What's the advice for them?
I would question their judgment on coolness. I mean, for sure. But getting past that, kind of we'll end where we started. HR to me it's a function that can help accelerate a business, but it's not a business. And so my advice is spend as much time, become a student of the business, the industry, the people, the operations, the products, all of those things. That's our capital, right? That's, as an HR practitioner, that's where we can bring value, is knowing that and helping link the people to that. So that's my advice.
Well, James, this has been a lot of fun. I feel like we could have spent another hour just because of just some of the amazing things that you've done. But we appreciate you spending some time with us. Looking forward to seeing you at some BHRC events in 2024.